She was running away from her father, not her enemy. Barefoot, her lips torn, her evening gown stained with blood. And the only man standing between her and death that night was the most dangerous man in Chicago. He didn't save her out of kindness. He saved her for a reason she would never forgive when she knew the truth. This is the story of a woman who refused to be a pawn, and a man who learned that love cannot live in a cage. Like and comment the city you're viewing so I know how far this story has come. And don't go anywhere, because the first part will change everything you think you know about this story. The rain hit Chicago like it had a grudge. It came down in sheets, not drops. Thick, cold, the kind of rain that soaked through wool coats in 30 seconds and turned the gutters into rivers running black under the streetlights. Downtown smelled like wet concrete and exhaust, and something older underneath, something that never quite washed away no matter how hard the sky tried. Isla Vane was running barefoot. She'd lost the left heel somewhere on Michigan Avenue, snapped it on a storm drain trying to cut between the hotel's service entrance and the parking structure beyond. The right heel she'd pulled off herself 2 blocks later when the imbalance started making her ankle roll. Both shoes were Louboutins, $1,200. Her father had handed them to her that afternoon with a smile, told her they'd look beautiful at the dinner. She'd thrown the second one at the face of the first man who grabbed her. She hadn't waited to see if it connected. Now she was 3 blocks east of the Meridian Grand and running out of places to go. The alley behind the Blackwood Hotel was narrow, smelled like dumpster grease and standing water, and the overhead light above the service door had been broken for what looked like months. Good. She pressed herself flat against the brick wall, back to the cold, wet stone, and tried to breathe without sound. Her feet were cut. She could feel it without looking. The bite of broken glass from 2 blocks back, the sharp bite that had made her stumble, the slow, warm slide of blood mixing with rainwater between her toes. She pressed one palm flat to the wall and focused on that sensation instead of the fear, because the fear was the thing that would get her killed. She knew that. She'd known it for years in the way you know things when you grow up in a house where showing weakness was the same as handing someone a weapon. Her lip was split on the left side. She'd bitten through it herself when she'd fallen against the concrete outside the hotel's south entrance. Not from a hit, just from the fall, just from running. The blood tasted like copper and salt, and it kept seeping no matter how many times she pressed her tongue against it. She listened. Footsteps. 2 sets. Maybe 3. They were moving toward the alley from the east end, not running, because the men doing this for Victor Orlov had done it enough times to know that panicked prey always made mistakes, and panic was contagious. You moved slow and controlled and let the target exhaust itself. She'd heard her father use that exact language once at the dinner table, explaining something to a man in a gray suit who had nodded like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Isla had been 16. She'd excused herself to clear the plates and stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes before she could make her face do something normal again. That was 8 years ago. She'd spent 8 years getting better at making her face do normal things while the rest of her rotted underneath. The footsteps slowed at the alley entrance. Isla's hand found the length of metal pipe on the ground before her mind fully registered picking it up. Half a broken fire escape bracket, rusted at one end, maybe 2 feet long. She brought it up in both hands, shifted her weight forward onto the balls of her bleeding feet, and made herself small against the wall. The silver evening dress was useless, catching every stray thread of light like a beacon. She'd thought about that 5 minutes ago and had no good answer for it, so she'd filed it under things she couldn't control and moved on. The first man came around the corner moving exactly the way she'd been afraid he would. Not rushing, not announcing himself, just stepping into the alley with the quiet confidence of someone who had found cornered women before and found them manageable. He reached for her. Isla swung. The pipe connected with his forearm instead of his face. He'd been faster than she calculated. And the impact rang up into her wrists hard enough to make her teeth clack. He made a sound between a grunt and a curse, and his reaching hand went back. But he didn't go down. And that was the problem with hitting men who were made for exactly this, who absorbed violence the way walls absorbed noise. She swung again. He caught her wrist. Not caught. Seized. His grip locked around her wrist like something mechanical, and she felt the bones in her forearm compress, and she yanked against it with everything she had, which was not enough, which she'd known was probably not going to be enough. Let go! A second hand closed around her other wrist from behind. She didn't scream. She'd made herself a promise about screaming a long time ago. It was the sound of someone expecting help to come, and help had never come. And she was done performing desperation for audiences that didn't exist. She kicked. She threw her weight sideways. She got her knee up toward the first man's groin and clipped his inner thigh instead, which did nothing. And then headlights swept into the mouth of the alley from the western end, and both men went briefly still. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop. The rain hammered the roofs. The engines cut. Nobody moved for a moment that stretched like wire pulled too tight. Isla was still struggling between the 2 men, both wrists held, breath coming in ragged pulls through her nose, and she was doing math in her head. How many men in 3 SUVs? Which direction had the least of them? Whether the fire escape above the dumpster would hold her weight. When the driver's door of the center vehicle opened. The man who stepped out was tall. She registered that first, and then registered the coat. Black, tailored, completely dry because he'd been inside the vehicle, which meant the dryness was temporary, and he simply didn't seem to care about that either way. He moved like someone who had never in his life been in a hurry, which was more frightening than rushing would have been. Rushing meant adrenaline. This was something else. He said one word. Release. Both men let go of her wrist simultaneously. Isla stumbled forward half a step from the sudden absence of resistance, caught herself, and brought the pipe back up. Her hands were shaking. She was aware of that and she hated being aware of it, but there it was. The fine tremor in both wrists from the grip, the cold, the blood loss from her feet, the sustained burn of running on adrenaline since the moment her father's man had put a hand on her shoulder inside the hotel's private dining room and said, quietly, that Mr. Orlov was waiting and she should come without making things difficult. She had not come without making things difficult. The tall man stopped 10 feet away. He looked down. Her feet. The blood. The silver dress shredded at the hem. He looked back up without any particular expression she could name. Not pity, not calculation, not the specific brand of cold assessment she was used to from men who looked at her and saw a senator's daughter, a political asset, a useful face above a useful body. "You're limping," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, like the rest of him. "I'd rather crawl," Isla said, "than go anywhere with another monster." Something moved in his face. It wasn't a smile. She didn't think his face knew how to make that particular arrangement anymore, if it ever had. It was subtler, like a door closing very quietly somewhere behind his eyes. "Good," he said, "then fight me too." She didn't lower the pipe. He didn't move toward her. Behind him, his men stood absolutely motionless beside the SUVs. She counted 6 visible. There were more she couldn't see. She understood the geometry of this situation with total clarity. She was trapped in an alley between men working for Orlov and men working for this stranger. The rain was getting harder. Her feet were leaving blood on the wet asphalt, and she had approximately 0 good options remaining. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who knows who's hunting you," he said, "and who sent them." "That's not an answer?" "No," he agreed. She studied his face for something that would help her understand what she was looking at. He was maybe mid-30s. Dark hair, wet now at the temples. A jaw that looked like it had been hit more than once and had healed wrong in places. The eyes were what stopped her. Not cold exactly, but controlled in the way that things under tremendous pressure are controlled. The way a fault line is controlled. Everything contained and still and promising. Nothing about what happens if the pressure gets high enough. "My name is Damien Blackthorne," he said. She felt the name before she recognized it. Felt it the way you feel weather change before you see it. A shift in air pressure, in the quality of the dark around them. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name the same way everyone knew to look both ways before crossing against the light. Not because someone told you the rules, because you survived long enough to understand what the rules were protecting you from. "You're Blackthorne Syndicate," she said. "Yes." "You're going to take me somewhere and use me," she said. "Same as them." Damien Blackthorne held her gaze without flinching and said, "Maybe." The honesty was so unexpected that she almost lowered the pipe. Almost. "That's supposed to make me trust you?" No, he said. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm telling you that the 6 men who just called their handler on the east end of this alley are 40 seconds from coming back with 4 more. And you're bleeding on both feet, and the pipe you're holding will hurt the first man who reaches you and not the second. He paused. Those are facts, he said, not an offer. Isla's jaw hurt. She'd been clenching it without realizing. She made herself stop, worked her molars apart, breathed through the space between her teeth. Her feet throbbed. The cut on her left arch was deep enough that she could feel it pulling with every small shift of her weight, and the rain kept washing the blood down in pink rivulets across the pale skin of her feet, and none of this was how tonight was supposed to end. Tonight was supposed to end with the encrypted drives in federal hands and her on a bus to anywhere. Instead, her father had found out she was going to run. Instead, he'd had men at every exit. Instead, she'd gone out a bathroom window on the 14th floor of the Meridian Grand and torn her dress on the ledge and lost her shoes running and ended up here, bleeding in an alley in the rain, making the worst possible choice between 2 terrible options while a man with a voice like a locked room waited for her to finish the math. She lowered the pipe. Not because she trusted him, because the math was the math. Damian Blackthorne stepped aside and gestured toward the center vehicle. 2 of his men moved to flank her at a distance, not touching, not crowding, which she noticed, and which she filed away the way she filed everything, into a cabinet somewhere behind her eyes where she kept the things that didn't fit the pattern she expected. She walked toward the SUV. Her feet left small red prints on the asphalt with each step. She didn't look down at them. She got in. The door closed. Outside, she could hear shouting starting up at the east end of the alley. Orlov's men arriving to find her gone. Damian got into the front passenger seat without hurry, without looking back at the shouting. The driver pulled out smoothly, and the 3 SUVs moved through the rain in a direction Isla didn't recognize for the first 3 minutes. She sat behind the tinted glass and watched Chicago slide past, and pressed the hem of her dress against her left foot and thought about the drives. She'd sewn them into the lining of her coat, which was hanging in the coat check of the Meridian Grand. She said nothing. The car moved north. Blackthorne Estate was not what she expected, which she supposed was the point. She'd expected something fortress-like, brutal, a physical expression of what the man who owned it was supposed to be. What she got was a mansion on the Lake Michigan shore that looked more like a museum that had decided to become a house. 4 stories of pale stone and dark windows, and a gate that closed behind them without any visible hand touching it. The grounds were dark. No decorative lighting, no landscaping theater. Just a long driveway and the sound of the lake beyond it and the rain. Inside she was taken, not dragged, taken with the specific courtesy of someone who understood the distinction mattered, to a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Large, clean, a bathroom visible through 1 door, a window overlooking the lake through reinforced glass that she noted immediately and studied without appearing to study it. The guard outside the door was audible rather than visible, a single set of measured footsteps. She explored the room methodically once she was alone. Checked the window, locked from inside, which meant she could unlock it, which was something. Checked the bathroom. Single exit, no exterior window, no items that could be weaponized beyond the obvious, which was not nothing. Checked the closet. Folded clothing in several sizes, which told her this room was used for this purpose with regularity, which told her other things she didn't want to think about yet. She sat on the edge of the bed. Her feet had soaked the carpet in 2 small patches of diluted red. She stared at them for a moment. Then she got up, went to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and cleaned the cuts with water and what she could find under the sink. Antiseptic wipes, gauze, tape. Her hands didn't shake. She was proud of that. She worked slowly and methodically and didn't make noise when it burned. She was wrapping the 2nd foot when the door opened. Not the bedroom door, the bathroom doorway, which she'd left open because closed doors in unfamiliar houses made her feel like she was already in a box. Damian Blackthorne stood in the doorway. He'd changed the white shirt for something gray. The coat was gone. He was holding a first aid kit. A serious one, the kind with more than Band-Aids, with suture strips and antiseptic, and a cold pack. He looked at the improvised bandaging she'd done on her own foot and said nothing for a moment. "You could have waited," he said. I don't wait for people I don't know to decide when I get medical attention, she said. He sat down on the closed toilet lid across from her, set the kit down on the floor between them, opened it. She watched him take out a proper bandage and hold it toward her without reaching for her foot. Waiting. She looked at the bandage, then at him. If you touch me without permission again, I won't, he said. The flatness in his voice was not the flatness of someone who'd been trained to say the right thing. It was the flatness of someone who meant it the way they meant their own name, something that didn't require decoration to be true. She extended her right foot. He worked without talking. She watched his hands. Careful, methodical. The same economy of motion she'd noticed when he stepped out of the SUV. There was an old scar across the back of his right hand, pale white against his skin, thin and deliberate looking. There were others on his knuckles, the kind that came from hitting things that hit back. How long have you known about me? She asked. He finished taping the bandage and reached for the cold pack. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She absorbed that. And you waited until I was running barefoot in an alley. I waited until the circumstances made approaching you less dangerous for both of us. Dangerous, she said. That's an interesting word. He looked up briefly. Your father has 12 men on his private security rotation who report to Orlov's organization. Your phone has been monitored since February. Your apartment in Hyde Park was searched twice in the last month while you were at work. He looked back down. Approaching you before tonight would have guaranteed they moved you before I could get to you. Isla sat with that for a moment. So you watched, she said. Yes. While my father was... She stopped. Yes, Damien said again. She pulled her foot back. He let her. She pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger until the pain made a clean, bright point she could focus on instead of the sound of her own heartbeat, which had gotten loud in a way she didn't like. You always kidnap injured women? She asked. Her voice came out even. She was glad. No, Damien said. Just the ones being hunted by men worse than me. That's a very low bar. Yes, he said. It is. He didn't apologize for it, didn't qualify it or soften it or perform humility she wouldn't have believed anyway. He just said it and sat with it the way someone sits with something true and uncomfortable and known. She hated that she found it more tolerable than a lie would have been. I want my coat, she said. I left it at the hotel coat check. Something in Damien's expression shifted. Not surprise, something more like recognition. Someone is already retrieving it, he said. Isla felt the floor move under her. Not literally. The sensation of the ground changing its nature underfoot, the way it had changed in the alley when he'd said his name, the way it had changed in the hotel bathroom when she'd looked at herself in the mirror and understood that her father had planned tonight for months, and she was the only one who hadn't known until 2 hours ago. You know about the coat, she said. Damien held her gaze. Not the coat, he said. What's inside it? She stood up, fast enough that the blood rush made her temples pound. You searched me. I have people who are very good at understanding what someone in your position is most likely carrying, he said, without moving from where he sat. I didn't search you. I predicted you. That's worse, she said. I know. She stood at the edge of the bathroom door, 2 feet from where he sat, and looked at him. She was trying to find the shape of what he was. She'd learned to read men early and well. Had to, growing up in a house where misreading cost you. And Damien Blackthorne kept sliding out from under the categories she had for them. He wasn't performing safety. He wasn't performing menace. He was just sitting there in her bathroom with a first aid kit, telling her true things she didn't want to know, and waiting for her to decide what to do with them. What do you want with the drives? She said. The same thing they hold, he said. Leverage. Against Orlov. Among others. That's my evidence, she said. I built that. I spent 14 months. I know. Then you know I'm not handing it to another man who'll use it to build another empire. Damien stood. Slowly, with the kind of care someone takes when they're aware that sudden movement has consequences. He picked up the first aid kit. He looked at her with those fault-line eyes. I'm not asking you to hand it over, he said. I'm asking you to use it. with protection you don't currently have. And what do you get? Orlov is going to come after me now regardless, he said. He'll assume I have the drives whether you give them to me or not. I'd rather not be at war with Orlov over a fiction when the reality is available. Isla stared at him. That is the least romantic reason for an alliance I've ever heard, she said. Something moved in his face again. That same door closing. I don't do romance, he said. I noticed. He moved past her toward the bathroom door, giving her space, keeping the distance between them deliberate and unambiguous. He stopped in the doorway. The coat will be here by morning, he said. Get some sleep. I won't sleep, she said. I know, he said, and left. She stood in the bathroom for another minute after he was gone. Then she went to the bedroom window and looked out at Lake Michigan, black and furious under the rain, and thought about the 14 months of documentation hidden in a coat lining. She thought about her father smiling at the dinner table while men in gray suits nodded. She thought about the women whose names were in those files, women who'd been useful, who'd become commodities, who'd disappeared into networks that senators and judges and men like Viktor Orlov had built and maintained and protected because everyone in the system was either complicit or afraid. She thought about the fact that Damian Blackthorne had been watching her for 3 weeks and had not moved until she was running. She didn't know yet whether that made him careful or cruel. She stood at the window until the sky outside began to lighten fractionally at the edges, the rain finally losing some of its fury, the lake settling from black to dark gray. She didn't sleep. She sat on the floor with her back against the window frame, and she thought, and she listened to the guard's footsteps in the hall outside, and she thought some more. In the morning, the coat arrived. A woman she hadn't seen before brought it in, young, quiet, who moved the way trained people move, placed it on the foot of the bed without speaking, and left. Isla crossed the room and picked it up. She ran her fingers along the lining until she felt the slight hardness there, the 2 small rectangles sewn between the silk and the outer shell. Still there. She let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. Then she turned and found Damian Blackthorne standing in the open doorway, not inside the room, exactly on the threshold, watching her hold the coat with a look that was, for just 1/2 second, something other than controlled. They're still there, she said. Good, he said. She turned the coat over in her hands. 3 men died last night, you said. 4 by morning. Orlov's? 2 of his, 2 of mine. She looked up at that. She looked. He said it without ceremony, the way you say a cost you've accounted for but not fully absorbed, the arithmetic of loss that hadn't finished settling into grief yet. I'm sorry, she said. She didn't know why. It came out before she decided on it. Damian looked at her for a moment. No one said that to me in a very long time, he said. It wasn't an invitation for more. She didn't offer more. But something shifted between them in the space of that sentence, something small and structural, like a weight redistributing itself across a foundation, not visible, just felt. I'm not giving you the drives, she said. I know. But I'll decrypt what's relevant to Orlov while I'm here, she said. On my terms. On my timeline. And the originals stay with me. Damian said nothing for a moment. And in exchange, he said, you keep Orlov's men away from me long enough to finish the job, she said. And when it's done, you let me walk out. He looked at her. You think I'm going to say no, she said. No, he said. I think you're the first person in 3 years who's negotiated with me without shaking. Isla held his gaze. I've been shaking since last night, she said. I'm just better at hiding it than most people. Damian Blackthorne looked at her for a long moment, with those eyes that promised nothing and contained everything, and then he nodded once and stepped back from the doorway. The negotiation was done. But Isla stood there holding her coat with the drives still sewn into the lining and understood, somewhere below the level of language, that something else had started. Something neither of them had agreed to. Something that didn't care about the terms they'd just set. Something slow and dangerous, and already moving through the walls between them whether she wanted it to or not. Outside, the rain had stopped. The lake was still. And somewhere across the city, Viktor Orlov was making calls. The first 3 days at Blackthorn Estate passed the way bad weather passes. Not quickly, not cleanly, but with a kind of grinding persistence that wore at the edges of everything. Isla established her own rules inside the first 24 hours. She woke before the household did, which meant before 5 in the morning, because she'd never been a good sleeper, and because sleeping deeply in an unfamiliar place felt like a form of surrender she wasn't prepared to offer. She explored the accessible parts of the estate methodically: the East Wing hallway, the library on the ground floor, the kitchen, the long glass-sided corridor that connected the main house to what appeared to be a secondary structure used for security operations. She noted the guards' rotation patterns. She noted which doors required keycards and which didn't. She noted that the woman who'd brought her coat, whose name turned out to be Cora, mid-20s, former military by the way she held her shoulders, was the only member of Damien's staff who looked at Isla like she was a person rather than a logistical problem. She did not attempt to leave, not because she couldn't find a route. She could find 3, with varying degrees of risk. She didn't leave because the coat was upstairs and the drives were still sewn into it, and she had not yet identified a safe place outside this house to take them. And running without the drives was not running. It was just relocating her problems. She told herself that every morning. It was true every morning. She believed it a little less each time. On the second morning, she asked Cora for a laptop. Cora had looked at her with the specific, careful expression of someone checking internal instructions. What specifications? Isolated from your network, Isla said. Air-gapped. I'll know if it isn't. 20 minutes later, Cora returned with a laptop still in its manufacturer packaging and a small wireless signal detector Isla hadn't asked for. She looked at the signal detector for a moment. "You thought of that?" she asked. "Mr. Blackthorn thought you'd ask for it," Cora said. Eventually, Isla picked up the signal detector and turned it over in her hands. "Tell him thanks," she said. The words felt strange leaving her mouth. "You can tell him yourself," Cora said. "He has dinner at 7. He eats alone if there's no one to eat with." Isla looked up. "Is that an invitation?" "It's information," Cora said, and left. She went to dinner. She didn't examine why too closely. She went because the alternative was eating alone in a room that wasn't hers, staring at walls that weren't hers, and because there were things she wanted to know about Damien Blackthorn that she could only learn by watching him in an unguarded moment, and because she was honest with herself about this at least. The conversation in the bathroom 2 nights ago had left a splinter somewhere under her skin that she hadn't been able to work out. The dining room was smaller than she expected. The table sat 8 but was set for 2 at one end, which told her either Cora had anticipated Isla's presence or this was a regular arrangement and Damien simply preferred one end of a large table to a smaller one. He was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she entered the room, which surprised her enough that she stopped walking for half a step. "Sit," she said, because the formality made her uncomfortable. He sat. They ate for several minutes in a silence that was not comfortable but was at least honest. The food was good. Someone in this house knew how to cook and wasn't performing it, wasn't trying to impress, just knew how. Roasted chicken, vegetables, bread that was still warm, simple. She ate more than she expected to. "You set up the laptop," Damien said. "I ran diagnostics," she said. "It's clean." "I know. I had it prepared that way." "I know you did," she said. "I'm telling you I verified it independently." Something in his jaw shifted. Not offense. Closer to something like approval, which was almost more irritating. "The drives are encrypted with a layered system," she said. "Custom. It takes time to move through the layers without triggering the erasure protocols." "How much time?" "Depends on which files we're prioritizing," she said. "The Orlov-specific material. His financial routing, his network contacts, the transaction records connecting him to your senators and judges. That's in the second layer, probably 3 days to safely extract." "We have less than 3 days," Damien said. She set her fork down. "Then tell me what happened." He looked at her for a moment, measuring something. Then he told her. Orlov had moved assets overnight, money, personnel, and 3 containers through the port of Chicago that Damien's dock contacts said were not on any manifest. Orlov was preparing something, not a response to the failed alley retrieval. Orlov was too experienced to move that fast over a single missed grab. This was something that had already been in motion, something that had a date attached to it. What date? Isla asked. 4 days from now, Damien said. There's a federal judiciary committee meeting in Springfield. 3 of the judges in your files are scheduled to attend. Isla absorbed that. He's going to move them. Or remove them. Remove. Yes. She picked her fork back up, set it down again. If those judges disappear before the evidence reaches federal prosecutors, the network survives, Damien said, restructures. The connections we could use to dismantle it go cold. And my father, she said, your father is the least of my concerns. He's the most of mine, she said, with a flatness that made Damien look at her. She wasn't angry. That was the thing she couldn't explain to people who didn't understand it. The anger had been there once, white-hot and consuming, and it had burned down to something much colder and more useful. What she felt about Marcus Vane now was closer to purpose than feeling. He had used her. He had sold people. He had sat at the dinner table in a house full of nice things and made decisions about human lives the way other men decided where to summer. And she intended to take every piece of evidence she had and burn his world down with it in a way he could not survive politically, legally, or in terms of whatever remained of his reputation. That wasn't rage anymore. That was a plan. I'll start on the Orlov files tonight, she said. I'll need access to a secure printer and a legal contact who isn't compromised. I have both. Of course you do. He looked at her. That bothers you? The fact that you have a solution to everything bothers me, she said. It means you've needed solutions to everything before. It means this isn't the first time someone sat in this house with a problem that required your particular skill set. Damien was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It isn't. How many? She asked. He seemed to decide something. 4 people have stayed in that room, he said, in the last 6 years. 2 were witnesses in federal cases. One was a woman who worked for a man I was negotiating with, and whose safety became relevant to those negotiations. One was a man who owed me a debt and was being collected by the people he owed it to. What happened to them? Isla asked. The witnesses testified and relocated. The woman went home. A pause. The man didn't survive long enough to reach the house. Isla looked at him. You couldn't stop that one. No. The word had weight. She let it sit. And me, she said. What category am I? Damien's eyes held hers for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Undecided, he said. She didn't know why that felt like more of an answer than any of the others. She worked until 3 in the morning. The first layer of encryption peeled back cleanly. She'd designed it that way, a false front with just enough complexity to slow down anyone who didn't know the specific key sequence. The real work started at the second layer. She sat cross-legged on the library floor, the laptop open on the coffee table, her back against one of the reading chairs, and she moved through the files with the careful patience of someone diffusing something, because that's what it was. Every file she touched was a detonator with a hairpin trigger, and she'd been the one to build the trigger, and she knew exactly where the pressure points were, but knowing didn't make the work less slow or less cold or less exhausting. Around midnight, Damien came in. He didn't announce himself. He sat down at the far end of the library with a glass of something and a folder of papers she couldn't read from across the room and worked in silence. She looked at him once, briefly. He didn't look back. She returned to the laptop. For 2 hours they occupied the same room without speaking and without it feeling like something that needed to be resolved. She didn't examine that too closely either. It was just the fact of it. That silence in the presence of this man, who made silence feel like a climate rather than an absence, was somehow less exhausting than silence alone. She fell asleep somewhere after 2. She didn't mean to. She was working, and then she wasn't. The warmth of the room and the weeks of accumulated sleeplessness pulling her under between one keystroke and the next. And the laptop screen blurred and her chin dropped, and she was gone. She woke up on the reading chair. Not on the floor where she'd been sitting. On the chair, upright, with a blanket that smelled like cedar and something else, something clean and specific that she was aware of not wanting to identify, tucked across her lap. The laptop was on the table where she'd left it, closed now. The library was empty. The clock on the wall said 6:40. She sat there for a moment and felt something move through her chest that she did not have a useful name for and absolutely could not afford, and she breathed through it until it settled, and then she picked up the laptop, opened it, and went back to work. She did not ask Damien about the blanket. He did not mention it. But that afternoon, when she came down to the kitchen and found him there, not eating, just standing at the counter with coffee, reading something on his phone with the particular focused stillness he brought to everything, she stopped in the doorway and said, without deciding to, "You could have left me there." He looked up. "On the floor," she said. "You could have left me there." Damien looked at her for a moment. "I could do many things," he said. He went back to his phone. She went to the coffee maker and poured herself a cup and stood at the opposite counter and drank it. And outside the kitchen window, the lake was very blue and very cold, and the sky had no clouds in it for the first time in days, and none of that meant anything, but she noted it anyway. The proximity began doing things neither of them had authorized. It wasn't dramatic. There were no declarations. It was smaller than that. The specific kind of small that is worse because it accumulates. It was Damien knowing, by the fourth day, that she took her coffee without anything in it, except when she was tired, in which case she added sugar but not milk. It was Isla knowing, by the third day, that he slept less than she did, that the lights in his office on the East Wing were burning after 4 a.m. on multiple nights, and that he answered his own door when someone knocked because he didn't like waiting between receiving information and processing it. It was the conversations. The conversations were the dangerous part. They started as operational. She needed access to documents. He provided context about Orlov's network structure. She needed to understand the judicial connections. He walked her through the political architecture. But operational conversations have edges, and people with things they've never said aloud have a tendency, under sustained proximity and sleeplessness and the specific pressure of impending violence, to let things slip past those edges. On the fifth night, she was in the war room, a term she used internally with some irony, though the room itself was accurate to the description, all screens and city maps and a dry erase board covered in network diagrams she'd been helping populate, when she hit the third layer files. She sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "Damien." He came from across the room. She turned the laptop toward him. He read. She watched his face, watched the thing that happened to it. Not the door closing this time, something more fundamental, something below the level of expression, a kind of tectonic stillness that was worse to watch than anger would have been. "The girls in the third column," she said, "ages 14 to 22. Those are the ones who were moved through the Chicago ports." "I see it." 43 names, she said, "with dates. I see it. My father signed off on 8 of the transport authorizations personally." Silence. "I've known about the trafficking operation in general terms," she said. "I've known since I found the first file 14 months ago, but seeing the names—" Her voice did something she didn't want it to do, and she stopped and pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum for a moment. "Seeing them laid out like cargo manifests." "Isla." She looked up. He was looking at her with something she didn't have a clean category for. Not pity, not discomfort. Something that recognized something. The way his face had looked at the surveillance photo before any of this began. "There's going to be more in the next layer," she said. "Yes." "I need a minute," she said. "Take it." She got up and walked to the window and stood with her back to the room and pressed her forehead against the cold glass and breathed. The lake was black outside. The sky had more stars than she'd expected the city to allow. She stood there until her hand stopped clenching. When she turned around, Damien was still in the same position, not having moved, not having filled the silence with anything that would have made it worse. "Your knuckle scars," she said. "What are they from?" He was quiet for a moment. "My father ran this organization before me," he said. "For 22 years. I know that. What you don't know is what he ran it like." He paused. He treated the people inside it the same way Orlov treats people. Assets. Leverage. Disposable when they became more trouble than value. Another pause. He treated the people in his house that way too. Isla stood very still. "I took over the organization when I was 26, Damien said. "The circumstances of that transition were not legal." You killed him, Isla said. Yes. No hesitation, no performance of regret or justification. Just the fact of it, sitting in the room the same way all his other facts sat, without apology, without theater. I don't know if that makes you more or less dangerous, she said. Both, he said. Probably. She walked back to the table, sat down, pulled the laptop toward her. Then we finish this fast, she said, before Orlov moves on the judges. He sat down across from her. Together? He said. She looked at him across the table with all the files and the names and the years of calculated survival between them. Don't make it sound like more than it is, she said. What is it? He asked. Shared interest, she said. Same math as the alley. All right, Damien said. But his voice had something in it that wasn't quite agreement, and they both heard it, and neither of them said anything more about it. And the work continued, and the city beyond the window was quiet in the way cities are quiet at 3 a.m, holding its breath. On the 7th day, Vincent Morelli arrived. She'd heard the name before without context. Damien's consigliere, a word that implied everything it needed to imply about the structure of Blackthorn operations. She'd built a rough picture from inference. Mid-50s, had been with Damien's father before the transition, had stayed on after it for reasons that probably required their own investigation. What she hadn't built was anything that prepared her for the specific quality of attention he brought into a room. He was a small man, which surprised her. Compact, in a gray suit that was slightly too well pressed, with eyes that moved over everything the way surveillance cameras moved, missing nothing, recording it all. He shook Isla's hand when Damien introduced them and held it a half-second longer than required, and she felt, with absolute clarity, that he was measuring the grip. She gave him a firm one. He smiled. She didn't like the smile. Ms. Vane, he said, you're braver than your file suggested. My file, she said. Everyone who comes to Mr. Blackthorn's attention has a file, Morelli said. Vincent, Damien said. One word, just the name. But something in the delivery closed the line of conversation as clearly as a door. Morelli turned toward Damien with the smile still in place, carrying it the way someone carries something they've practiced carrying, and the two of them moved into a conversation about supply routing and dock schedules that Isla understood only partially. She stayed in the room because leaving would have been tactical retreat, and she'd promised herself she was done retreating, but she watched Morelli. She watched the way he positioned himself relative to Damien, slightly behind, slightly to the left, which was a position of deference but also of observation, a position from which you could watch a person's face without being watched in return. She watched the way he listened to Damien's instructions, with his eyes doing that recording thing and his expression doing a separate practice thing that had nothing to do with his eyes. She had no evidence for what she felt watching him. She filed it anyway. That night, lying in the bedroom she'd occupied for a week now, she lay awake with the ceiling and thought about what she knew and what she didn't, and what was happening to her in this house, in this situation, in the specific atmosphere of a man who moved like a weather system and kept making small gestures toward her. The first aid kit, the blanket, the signal detector, the clean air-gapped laptop, that didn't match any pattern she had for how men in his position behaved. She thought about the 43 names. She thought about her father's signature on 8 transport authorizations. She thought about the fact that somewhere in the next layer of the drives was evidence that would end careers and possibly lives, and was the culmination of 14 months of her own fear and work and solitude, and that she was going to use it, and that doing so was going to require trust she hadn't given anyone in years. She thought about Damien's voice saying, both, probably, with no apology in it. She was still thinking when the alert went off. Her laptop, across the room on the desk, lit up with a notification she'd programmed herself. A tripwire on a secondary file she'd buried in the 3rd layer, a test file she'd placed specifically to detect whether anyone had been accessing the drives without her knowledge. The notification meant the tripwire had been triggered, not from her laptop, from something else. Something accessing the drive's metadata remotely through a signal she hadn't adequately blocked, which meant someone had a more sophisticated intrusion toolkit than she'd accounted for. Someone had been reading the directory of the drives, not the files themselves, the directory, the index, the list of what was there. She sat up, pulled the laptop toward her, ran the trace. It took 11 minutes, which felt like a very long time to sit in a dark bedroom with her pulse doing something loud and insistent in her ears while the trace thread worked through the layers. At the end of 11 minutes, she had a result. The access point was inside the estate network. She stared at that for a long time. Then she got up, went to the window, and looked out at the lake. It was 4 in the morning. The water was perfectly dark. She stood there with the laptop balanced on the window ledge and thought about the math with a cold precision that left no room for the feeling underneath it, the sick lurching thing that wanted to be called betrayal, but that she wouldn't allow to be called anything yet because she didn't have enough information, and feeling things without information was how you ended up wrong about the people who wanted you. She didn't go to Damien. That was the first decision, made in the 4 seconds after the trace result appeared on her screen, standing at the window with the lake black below and the estate silent around her. She didn't go to Damien because the access point was inside the estate network. And inside the estate network meant inside the estate, and inside the estate meant anyone, including the man whose blanket still smelled like cedar in the closet where she'd folded it 2 days ago because she hadn't wanted to give it back and hadn't wanted to examine why. She closed the laptop, sat with the dark for a moment. Then she opened it again and ran a secondary trace, because the first result could be a spoofed origin point, because someone sophisticated enough to access the drive's directory remotely was sophisticated enough to make that access look like it came from somewhere it didn't. The secondary trace took longer, 23 minutes. She sat cross-legged on the floor with her back against the bed frame and watched the progress bar and listened to the estate breathe around her, the distant sound of the lake, the barely audible rotation of the night guard on the exterior perimeter, the specific quality of silence in a large house at 4 in the morning that was different from the silence of a small one, heavier somehow, more inhabited by its own sounds. The secondary trace confirmed the first. Internal network. Specifically, the secondary router in the East Wing, which was the wing that contained Damien's office. She sat with that result for a long time. Then she got up, dressed in the dark, pocketed the laptop, and went to find Cora. Cora slept in a room off the kitchen, another thing Isla had cataloged during her systematic mapping of the estate. She knocked twice, quietly. Heard movement. Cora opened the door in 30 seconds, fully awake in the way trained people are fully awake, which meant she'd probably been awake before the knock. "I need to know who has access to the East Wing router," Isla said. Cora looked at her, read something in her face. "Come in." Isla came in. Cora's room was small and sparse and military in its organization. One photograph on the desk, a woman who might have been her mother, standing in front of something green. Everything else functional. "Sit down," Cora said. "I don't need to sit down." "You look like you need to sit down." Isla sat down. Cora sat across from her on the edge of the bed. She was quiet for a moment in a way that wasn't the silence of someone deciding what to say, but of someone deciding how much. "The East Wing router," Isla said. "Who accesses it?" "Mr. Blackthorne. His IT team. 2 people, both cleared at the highest level. And Vincent Morelli, who has standing clearance for all network infrastructure." Isla was quiet. "What happened?" Cora asked. "Someone used that router to access the metadata on the drives," Isla said. "At 3:47 this morning." Cora's expression didn't change. It was the non-change of someone absorbing a thing they're not entirely surprised by, which was its own kind of information. "Mr. Blackthorne was in his office until at least 2, Cora said. "He has a standing insomnia problem. I can verify his location on the internal camera logs." "Do it," Isla said. Cora picked up her phone. It took 4 minutes. She showed Isla the timestamp. Damien's office, on camera, 2:14 a.m., him at his desk. 2:51, him moving to the window. 3:30, him leaving the office. 3:47, the access timestamp, 17 minutes after Damien had left the East Wing. "Morelli," Isla said. Cora said nothing. "You knew about him," Isla said. "I have concerns I've never had sufficient evidence to formalize," Cora said carefully. "That's a very careful sentence. I work in a very careful house." Isla looked at the phone screen with the camera timestamps. The cold in her chest had settled into something specific now. Not panic, not the scattered fear of the alley, but something sharp and directional. The particular cold of a person who has been building towards something for 14 months and has just found a new variable in the equation that changes the result. "I need to talk to Damien," she said. "It's 4 in the morning." "I know what time it is." Cora stood up. "I'll take you." Damien answered his bedroom door on the second knock. He was awake. She could tell from the speed of the answer and the fact that he was still dressed, shirt untucked, jacket gone, but the rest of him in the same clothes she'd seen him in hours earlier. He looked at Isla and then at Cora and read whatever was in their faces and stepped back from the door without a word. The room was large and dim and almost aggressively undecorative. A bed that looked like it was slept in under protest, books on every surface and the disordered stacking of someone who reads without system, grabbing what interests them and leaving it where they finished. A window overlooking the lake, uncurtained. The chair by the window had an indentation in the cushion that suggested it was used more than the bed. She showed him the trace results on the laptop screen. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. She watched his face. The fault-line stillness was there, but underneath it something was moving. Not surprise exactly, something more like the specific expression of a man confronting a suspicion he'd managed to keep from becoming a conclusion for longer than was probably wise. "Morelli," he said. "The camera logs put you out of the East Wing at 3:30, she said. "Access timestamp is 3:47. Damien looked at the screen. "For how long has he been running his own intelligence on the drives?" Damien said. "Not to her, to himself, or to the room." "Long enough to know what's in them," Isla said. "Or at least what categories of material they contain." Damien moved to the window, stood with his back to her, looking at the lake. She watched the set of his shoulders, the controlled tension there, the way his hands were still at his sides, which she understood now as something he did when he was working very hard at not doing something else with them. "Morelli has been with this organization for 26 years, Damien said. "He was my father's man before he was mine. And you kept him." He knew more about the operation's structure than anyone else alive. Letting him go meant either destroying him or creating an enemy with institutional knowledge of everything we'd ever done. A pause. Neither was clean. "So you managed him," Isla said. "Yes." "And he managed you," she said, "by staying close enough to know what you knew." Damien turned from the window. She held his gaze. "He was at the dinner," she said. "Your dinner, the night Orlov was there 6 months ago. I found a reference to it in the third layer files. A guest list for a private meeting at the Meridian Grand. Morelli's name is on it." The room changed. Not physically. The same dim light, the same indented chair, the same unremarkable walls. But the quality of the air shifted, the way it shifts in a room when something said in it cannot be unsaid. "Show me," Damien said. She showed him. He read it 3 times. She counted. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed, which was the first time she'd seen him sit without choosing to, the first time gravity seemed to have any say in the matter. "He's been feeding Orlov," Damien said. "Information, at minimum," she said. "Possibly more." "The 2 men I lost the night I took you from the alley," he said. "Very quiet now. Orlov knew exactly which route they were on. The silence between them was terrible." "I told Morelli the route," Damien said. "He said it the way you say something that costs you. Not in volume, not in visible distress, but in the specific weight of a sentence that a person has just finished carrying to its conclusion and set down in front of themselves to look at." Isla sat down in the chair by the window, not because she was tired, because the geometry of the moment seemed to require both of them to be at the same level. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "What I want to do would not be useful," he said. "Then what are you going to do?" He looked at her. "I'm going to find out how deep it goes," he said, "and then I'm going to make sure it stops." She nodded slowly, and in the meantime, he knows the drive's directory. He knows what categories of evidence exist. He'll report to Orlov. Yes. Which means Orlov will accelerate his timeline. Yes. Which means we have less time than 3 days, she said. We might have hours. Damien stood up. The decision had been made somewhere between sitting down and standing up. She could see it in him, the shift from processing to motion, the way a system under pressure moves from assessment to execution. "I need to call someone," he said. "Stay in this room." She almost argued. She looked at him and understood that it wasn't a command. It was a statement of the safest option, and she was done arguing with the safest option when the math was clear. "Go," she said. He left. She sat in the chair by the window, with the laptop and the lake, and the specific kind of alertness that lives on the other side of exhaustion, where the body has given up on sleep and settled into a kind of crystalline wakefulness instead. Everything too sharp, every sensation slightly too loud. She opened the drives and kept working. She was 3 files deep into the Orlov financial routing when she heard the voices in the hallway. Not raised. That was the thing. The voices were low, controlled, professional, which made them more alarming than shouting would have been. She closed the laptop, stood, moved to the door, and listened. Damien's voice. And Morelli's. She couldn't make out words. The door was thick and the hallway acoustics worked against her, but she could hear the cadence. Damien speaking in that measured, unhurried way, and Morelli responding in something that was almost too smooth, too prepared, the cadence of a man who has run through this conversation in advance. Then silence. Then a door somewhere down the hall. Then nothing. She waited 3 minutes, counting her own breaths, before she opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. She moved toward Damien's office, which was the room at the end of the east wing, the room where the router was, where the camera had recorded him at his desk at 2:14 and 2:51. The door was closed. She put her hand on the handle, hesitated, then opened it. Damien was standing at his desk. Morelli was gone. "Where is he?" she asked. "Guest suite on the 3rd floor," Damien said. "I told him there was a security situation with the outer perimeter and I needed him on site until morning." He looked at her. "I needed him to believe he wasn't suspected until I know what he's told Orlov and when. He'll know something is wrong." "He already knows something is wrong," Damien said. "He accessed the directory because he knew you were working on the files and wanted to know how close you were. He's been managing a timeline." "Whose timeline?" Damien's jaw tightened. "I don't know yet." She came into the room, set the laptop on the desk beside his papers. "The financial routing files I've been working through. There are transfers I couldn't account for. Small amounts, irregular intervals. Not Orlov's pattern. Someone else moving money through his network without him knowing, or at least without it being documented as authorized." Damien looked at the screen she opened. She watched him read. She watched the exact moment he recognized something. "These account numbers," he said. "2 of them are Blackthorn accounts." "I know," she said. "These transfers predate my takeover of the organization by 3 years. I know that too. Morelli was running money through Orlov's network before I was even running this organization," Damien said. "While my father was still—" He stopped. "While your father was still alive," she said. The sentence completed itself in the room without either of them finishing it. "Morelli may have been feeding Orlov information about your father's operation," she said. "Information that made it easier for Orlov to expand into territory your father controlled. Information that created the conditions for the conflict between them." She paused. "The conflict that led to your father overextending, losing resources, becoming brutal in ways he wasn't before because the pressure was—" "Don't," Damien said. She stopped. He stood with his hands flat on the desk and breathed. She watched him do it. The deliberate mechanical quality of someone using their own respiratory system as a containment device, using the in and out of it as a wall against something that was trying to come through. She understood that. She'd built the same wall with the same materials for years. "I'm not defending your father," she said quietly. "I'm saying Morelli may have manufactured the circumstances." "I know what you're saying." "It means the decision you made at 26 was still mine," he said. "Whatever Morelli did or didn't do, the decision was mine." She was quiet. "I know that," he said. "I've always known that." She looked at the man standing at the desk with his hands flat on its surface and his jaw a locked thing and his eyes looking at the wall beyond the laptop screen, and she thought about the scar on the back of his right hand and the indented chair cushion and the blanket that smelled like cedar, and she thought about how a person builds a whole architecture of control out of the rubble of a thing that destroyed them, and how that architecture is always load-bearing in ways you don't discover until someone starts removing the supports. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number, text message, 3 words. He knows everything. She stared at it. Then another message, same number, arriving 10 seconds later. You have 2 hours. Damien was at her side before she'd finished reading it twice. He read over her shoulder. She felt him go very still behind her. Trace it, he said. Already running, she said, opening the trace application on the laptop. The trace took 90 seconds and came back clean, which meant the sender had used a relay that bounced the signal through enough intermediate points to be functionally untraceable in the time available. Someone on the inside is warning us, Damien said. Or it's Morelli, she said, trying to create chaos. If it's Morelli trying to create chaos, 2 hours is still the operative number, he said. Either way, we have 2 hours. She looked at him. To do what? To finish extracting the Orlov files, he said. To get them out of this house and into federal hands. And to get you out. I'm not leaving without... I know, he said. That's why I said the files first. She looked at him for a half-second longer than the conversation required. Then she sat down, opened the drives, and started moving faster than she'd allowed herself to move before, accepting slightly more risk in the extraction process in exchange for speed, because speed was the resource they were shortest on now. Damien made calls. She could hear him on the other side of the room, voice low, using language she only partially understood. Operational shorthand, names that were either code or real names used like code, locations specified by reference rather than address. She worked and listened and built a second picture of what he was assembling from the fragments she could hear, and what he was assembling was a response, a perimeter, a set of moving pieces that would converge on specific points at specific times. He was good at this. She'd known that. But hearing it, hearing the specific quality of his mind under pressure, the economy of it, the total absence of wasted motion even in speech, made it concrete in a way that the knowing hadn't. She was 40 minutes into the extraction when Cora appeared in the doorway. Isla looked up. Cora's face told her before the words did. Morelli's gone, Cora said. Damien ended the call. The guest suite? He asked. Window, Cora said. 3rd floor exterior. He'd knotted the bedding. The bedding. A man who had been with this organization for 26 years, who had a standing clearance for all network infrastructure, who had been managing a long game through 2 generations of Blackthorn power. He'd knotted hotel bedding and gone out a 3rd floor window rather than walk past the guards, because walking past the guards meant being seen leaving. Going out a window meant Orlov knew he was compromised and had pulled him before he could be used as a point of leverage. He's going to Orlov, Damien said. He's already there, Isla said, and the ice in her own voice surprised her. The message said 2 hours. That was 43 minutes ago. We have 1 hour and 17 minutes before whatever is coming arrives. Damien turned to her. She held his gaze. The files, she said. How much do you have? 60% of the Orlov routing documents, she said. The judicial connections are complete. The transport authorizations with my father's signature are extracted and clean. What I'm missing is the upper tier, Dick. The names above Orlov. The people he reports to. Those are the names that stop this permanently, Damien said. Yes. How long to extract them? 40 minutes minimum, she said, without the speed compromise. With it, maybe 25. With it, there's a 15% chance the erasure protocol triggers and I lose everything. Damien looked at her. Your call, he said. She looked back at him and thought about 43 names in a column and 8 transport authorizations and 14 months of nights she'd spent doing this instead of anything else, instead of any life she might have been building, instead of sleep or warmth or trust. She thought about what it had cost to get here and what it would cost to lose it at the last threshold. 30 minutes, she said. I can thread the middle. Do it. She threaded the middle. 28 minutes of the most precise, most controlled work she'd done in 14 months, moving through the last layer of encryption with the specific focus of someone who has reduced the whole world to a screen and a set of commands, and the fine motor steadiness of hands that will not shake because she has decided they will not shake. because the alternative is unacceptable, because 43 names are in a column and she is the only one who can bring them into the light. At the 28-minute mark, the last file transferred. She saved the package to 3 separate encrypted drives. The originals still in the coat lining, 2 copies she'd made in the last week onto separate hardware. She would take one. Damien would take one. The originals stayed with her. Done, she said. Damien was already moving. Cora has a vehicle in the East Garage. There's a federal contact in the loop. Her name is Reyes. She's out of the Chicago field office. She's been building a case against Orloff independently for 2 years, and she's been waiting for this. Reyes, Isla repeated, filing it. How long have you been in contact with her? 6 weeks, he said. She stopped, looked at him. 6 weeks, she said. Yes. Before you brought me here, she said. Yes. You were already building a federal case, she said. You already had a contact inside the Chicago FBI field office before I ever arrived in this house. Damien looked at her with the fault-line eyes and said nothing. She stood very still with the drives in her hands and felt the math changing again, felt the equation she'd been working with shifting, the variables rearranging themselves into a configuration that produced a different result, and the result was not the one she'd been operating with for the last week. You brought me here, she said. You knew I had the drives. You already had a federal contact. You already had the case framework. You needed the drives to complete it. She paused. What were you planning to give her in exchange for the drives? Damien was silent. Damien. Territory, he said. Along the East Coast. 3 port operations. She waited. And Isla Vane, he said. The senator's daughter who'd collected the evidence. Delivered safely with full cooperation. The room went very quiet. Delivered, she said. Yes. I was the deliverable, she said. Yes, Damien said. In the original arrangement. Before what? Her voice came out flat and cold and entirely steady. And she hated how steady it was, because beneath it something had cracked along a line she hadn't known was under that much pressure. Before you decided I was useful enough to keep? Before the drives turned out to be more comprehensive than you expected? Before I made you coffee in your kitchen and slept in your library, and you covered me with a blanket, and I was stupid enough to think... She stopped. Her jaw was clenched so tight, her back teeth ached. Before I knew you, Damien said. The original plan was made before I knew you. That's not the same as it not existing. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had carried a first aid kit into a bathroom and sat across from her in silence and said true things when he could have said useful ones, and covered her with a blanket she'd folded and kept because she hadn't wanted to give it back. She looked at him and understood with absolute clarity that both things were true, that the original plan had been what it was and that something had changed, and that both truths were real and neither of them canceled the other out, and that this was the worst possible kind of situation because there was nothing clean to be furious at. You should have told me, she said. Yes, he said. You should have told me before I started... She stopped again. Before you started trusting me, he said quietly. She looked away. Outside, somewhere on the estate perimeter, she heard the first sound she'd been unconsciously waiting for since Cora said Morelli was gone. A gunshot. Then 2 more in quick succession. Then the sound of engines. Orlov's men had arrived 47 minutes early, which meant Morelli had called them the moment the text message was sent to Ila's phone, which meant whoever had sent that warning had known Morelli was already in contact, which meant the 2-hour window was never real. It was the maximum possible time, and the real number had always been less, and she had 38 minutes left. The first thing Isla did was pocket the drives. All 3 of them, the 2 copies and the coat with the originals still sewn into the lining. Into the inside pocket of the jacket Cora had left folded over the desk chair 2 days ago. She'd never asked why the jacket was there. She was glad for it now. She zipped the inner pocket and pressed her hand flat against the outside of it for 1 second, feeling the slight hardness there, the weight of 14 months against her ribs. Then she looked at Damien. East Garage, she said. He was already moving. The estate had changed in the 40 seconds since the gunshots. She felt it before she saw it. The quality of the silence between sounds shifting from the heavy quiet of a large house at night to something taut and directional, the silence of a structure that had converted from habitation to defense. Doors she'd passed for a week opened as Damien's men moved through them, with weapons she'd known were always present but had never seen deployed. The hallway lighting dropped to red emergency strips. Somewhere deep in the house, an alarm system activated. Not an audible alarm, something tactical, vibrating through the floor in a frequency she felt in her molars. Cora met them at the east wing stairwell. She had a weapon in her right hand and a set of keys in her left, and the expression of someone who had always known this was one of the possible nights. South perimeter is compromised, Cora said. At least 8 vehicles. They came up the service road from the highway, not the main gate. Someone gave them the secondary access code. Morelli, Damien said. Has to be. Cora handed him the keys. The garage vehicle is already running. I had it started remotely when I heard the first shot. You're coming, Damien said. It wasn't a question. I'm staying, Cora said. Someone needs to manage the internal team and give you a window. She looked at Isla. The federal contact, Reyes, she's been notified. She has units en route, ETA 19 minutes. 19 minutes is too long, Isla said. I know, Cora said. The sound of gunfire outside intensified. No longer single shots, sustained exchange, the overlapping percussion of multiple weapons from multiple positions, and underneath it the sound of vehicles, engines, and tires, and the specific mechanical aggression of SUVs moving fast over gravel. Damien put one hand briefly on Cora's shoulder. Just his hand, just a second. Don't get killed, he said. Sir, Cora said, which was the first time Isla had heard her use the title, and something in the way she said it made it sound like something older and more complex than deference. Then Cora was gone back into the house, and Damien was pulling Isla toward the east garage stairwell, and she was moving, not because she was following him, but because the direction was correct, and the time for standing still making decisions about trust had ended the moment the gunshots started. The east garage was underground. The stairwell went down 2 flights and emerged into a concrete space that smelled like oil and cold stone and housed 4 vehicles, one of which was a dark gray SUV with its engine running, exhaust curling white in the cold air. Isla got in the passenger side. Damien took the wheel. He drove up the ramp without lights until the garage door opened onto the estate's north side, which was the side away from the lake and away from the service road, and theoretically away from the primary incursion point. The gate at the north boundary was already open. Cora's work, from inside. He pulled through it without slowing and turned north onto a residential street she didn't recognize and kept the lights off for the first quarter mile. Where are we going? She asked. There's a secondary safe house in Andersonville, he said. Not associated with Blackthorn in any public record. Morelli didn't know about it. How sure are you of that? Sure enough, he said. It was established after he was already managing his own information chain. He never had access to the documentation. Sure enough isn't certain, she said. Nothing tonight is certain, he said. Andersonville is the best option available. She looked out the window. They were moving north on a grid of dark residential streets. No traffic at this hour. The city quiet in that 4 a.m. way that felt borrowed rather than real. She could see the glow of the estate's exterior lights behind them. Or what she thought were the exterior lights until she understood it was too orange, too large, too mobile. Damien, she said. He checked the mirror. They set a fire, he said. She watched the orange glow in the side mirror grow and shift, and she thought about the library where she'd fallen asleep, the bedroom window overlooking the lake, the bathroom where he'd sat on the toilet lid and held the bandage toward her without reaching. She turned back to face forward. She would not think about what she couldn't help. Reyes, she said. Give me her direct number. Damien recited it without hesitation. She put it in her phone and called. It rang twice. Reyes. A woman's voice, awake and clipped, the specific voice of someone who had been awake and waiting. This is Isla Vane, Isla said. I have the complete Orlov extraction, financial routing, judicial connections, transport authorizations, everything. I have 3 copies on physical drives. A pause that lasted less than 2 seconds. Where are you? Moving north. We're leaving the estate. It's under attack. I have units 7 minutes out from your last known location. We're not at that location anymore, Isla said. Can you track this phone? If you authorize it. Authorized, Isla said. Track it, and send units to the estate grounds. Damien Blackthorne's people are still there. Another pause. Ms. Vane, my authority to act on the estate situation is Agent Reyes, Isla said. The files I'm carrying include the names of 3 federal judges and 2 sitting senators. They also include 43 names of women transported through Chicago ports for Victor Orlov's network. I am currently in a vehicle with 1 physical copy of that evidence. If this vehicle does not reach you safely, the other copies go to 4 separate journalists simultaneously. Do you want to be the agent who let the chain of custody break because of jurisdictional hesitation? Silence. I'm tracking your phone, Reyes said. I'm redirecting 2 units to intercept your route. Do not stop the vehicle for anyone who doesn't identify as federal. Understood. She ended the call. Damien glanced at her. She looked back at the road. The journalists, he said. That was a bluff? The 4 separate journalists are real, she said. The simultaneous release is a dead man's switch I set up 6 months ago. If I don't input an override code every 72 hours, the files go out. Damien was quiet for a moment. You've been running a dead man's switch for 6 months, he said. Since March, she said. I set it up after the second search of my apartment. You didn't tell me. I didn't tell anyone, she said. That's the point of a dead man's switch. He drove. She sat with the drives against her ribs and the phone in her hand and the cold from the window glass against her right arm, and she did not think about the orange glow in the mirror because thinking about it would not change it. Then the black SUV appeared behind them. It came from a side street 3 blocks back, no lights, accelerating fast. Then a second one from the opposite direction, cutting north to intercept their route. She saw them both in the mirror and on the street ahead simultaneously, and felt her body understand the geometry a half-second before her mind finished articulating it. We have 2, she said. I see them, Damien said. He turned hard left onto a street she didn't have time to read the name of, tires catching and then sliding on a patch of wet asphalt before the grip came back. The engine sound changed as he pushed the accelerator, and she braced one hand on the dash and kept her body loose rather than rigid, because rigid was how you got hurt when a vehicle moved like this. The SUV behind them made the same turn, faster than it should have been able to. They have the same vehicle, she said. Or better, Damien said. He turned again, north, then east, then north again, threading through a grid of streets she was mapping in her head as best she could. Andersonville was still 1.5 miles away. The federal units were 7 minutes out at last report, which was 90 seconds ago, and 7 minutes in this context was an eternity. How many men does Orlov have in Chicago tonight? She asked. More than he needs, Damien said. The containers through the port. That's what was in them. Personnel. He imported an army, she said. For 1 night, Damien said. Which means he's not planning to maintain a presence. He's planning to extract or eliminate and leave. Extract me, she said, or eliminate the evidence. Both. The SUV behind them closed the gap to 2 car lengths, and then something hit the back of their vehicle. Not a collision, a deliberate nudge, the technique of a driver trying to induce a spin. And Damien corrected with both hands on the wheel, steering into the slide rather than against it, and the SUV behind them pulled right and came up alongside instead of behind, and Isla saw the window going down. Down, Damien said. She was already moving, dropped below the dash line, one shoulder against the door, head below the window level, as the passenger window of the other SUV shattered inward in a cascade of safety glass and cold air hit her face, and she heard the shots, 4 of them in fast sequence, punching through the body panels above her. Damien drove without ducking. She wanted to tell him to get down. She understood that he couldn't. Their SUV clipped the curb, ran half up it, and came back down hard. She hit her elbow on the doorframe and felt the impact all the way to her shoulder. Damien wrenched them left onto a wider street, and the pursuing SUV overshot the turn, and she had 3 seconds. She came back up, found the phone, called Reyes. 1 ring. We're taking fire, she said. 2 pursuing vehicles. We're on... She looked for a street sign. North Clark, heading north. I have your location, Reyes said. My units are 4 minutes out. Can you hold 4 minutes? The second pursuing SUV reappeared ahead of them, coming south in their lane with its lights blazing, a head-on configuration that was either a bluff or not a bluff. Unknown, Isla said, and pocketed the phone. Damien saw the oncoming SUV. He didn't slow down. Neither did it. She sat with both hands on the dash and felt her heartbeat in her throat and in her fingertips and in the backs of her eyes, felt it with a clarity that was almost impersonal, the body's announcement that it understood the stakes had just become absolute. 50 feet, 40, 30. At 20 feet, Damien turned hard right onto a side street so narrow she felt both mirrors clip something as they went through, and the oncoming SUV blew past behind them with its horn going, brakes screaming. She heard the crash of it hitting something a second later. Another vehicle, a fixture, she couldn't tell. And then they were through and on a different street moving west, and she exhaled. You knew they'd go straight, she said. 80%, he said. That's not 100. No, he said. It isn't. Her hands were shaking. She put them flat on her thighs and pressed down until the shaking went somewhere she couldn't see it. The drives were still against her ribs. She pressed her arm against them, felt them there. The first pursuing SUV found them again 2 blocks later. It came up from behind, slower this time, more controlled, and this time she understood it was a different driver. More patient, more methodical, not trying to force a spin or run them off the road. Just following, maintaining the distance, waiting. He's holding for backup, Damien said. Or hurting us, she said. She looked at the street layout ahead, looked at the next intersection, felt the configuration of buildings and one-way streets and the specific constraints of the north side grid, and understood, with the same cold geometry that had kept her alive in the alley a week ago, what was happening. Don't go straight through the next intersection, she said. He looked at her. There will be a third vehicle coming from the right, she said. They're triangulating. They've been building the triangle for the last 2 turns. If you go straight, we're in a box. We turn left, we're heading back south, he said. Turn left, she said. Then first right. He turned left. No third vehicle from the right. She waited to feel relief and felt instead the sharp, bright bite of being correct, when correctness is its own kind of awful. Because the triangle had been 1 turn away, and if she'd seen it 1 turn later, they'd be in the box. He took the first right. Then she said, Stop. Isla, stop the vehicle. He stopped. She got out. The following SUV appeared at the end of the street behind them 30 seconds later, and slowed when it found their vehicle stationary in the middle of the road. Driver's side door open. Empty. She was already gone. She'd moved through a gap between 2 buildings. Barely a gap, more like a crack, the kind that exists between century-old Chicago structures that have settled incrementally toward each other over decades. With the drives in her jacket and the phone in her hand and her shoulder dragging against brick on both sides. She came out the other side into a narrow service lane and turned north and ran. Running with 2 broken glass cuts on her left foot, reopened from the week before when she'd spent too long on the estate floors without proper footwear, was a specific experience. The tape Cora had redone yesterday held, but the pressure of impact sent a bright, clean line of pain up through her ankle with every stride, and she ran through it the way she'd learned to run through things, by making the pain peripheral, by putting it in a room and closing the door and running toward the door at the end of the hall that led out. She heard shouting behind her. Men's voices, not Damien's, Russian-accented English. They'd found the gap. She turned east at the first opportunity and then north again, and her phone buzzed in her hand. Incoming call. Damien's number. She answered without slowing. I'm 1 block east of you, he said. North side of the street. Gray doorway. I see it, she said. Because she did. She could see the end of the block. The darker rectangle of a recessed building entrance, his silhouette in it. She ran toward it. He came out of the doorway when she was 20 feet away, and she registered the cut above his left eye that was bleeding freely, the way his right arm moved differently from his left, favoring the shoulder. Something had happened to the shoulder. And then she was at the doorway, and he pulled her in and pressed them both back against the doorframe as 2 men came around the corner at the end of the block. Both of them held perfectly still. The 2 men moved east, not north. Wrong direction. They passed the end of the block without looking up the street and disappeared. Isla's back was against the door. Damien was in front of her, one arm braced on the frame beside her head, his other hand, the shoulder that was damaged, at his side. His breath came fast and controlled, the way someone breathes when they're managing pain, using the exhale as a pressure valve. The cut above his eye was dripping. She watched a drop of blood track down his cheekbone and fall. "Your shoulder," she said quietly. "I'm functional," he said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at her from 3 inches away with those eyes that held everything in suspension and said, "Second shot clipped it. It's not structural." "You knew there was a second shot," she said. "When I was on the floor of the vehicle, there was a second round." "Yes." "You didn't say anything." "It wasn't going to help you to know," he said. She stared at him. The anger came back, the cold, directional kind, and it arrived already complicated by other things, which was the worst way for anger to arrive. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't decide what I need to know. We were taking fire." "I know we were taking fire. I was there." "Isla." His voice dropped, not quieter, lower. "They're going to find this doorway in approximately 90 seconds. She closed her mouth. He was right. "Reyes is 4 blocks north," she said. "Or she was 3 minutes ago." "Then north," he said. "Stay close." They moved north in a way that was not running, but was faster than walking. The specific controlled pace of people moving tactically through an unfamiliar space, using doorways and parked vehicles and the deep shadows between streetlights. Damien moved with his right arm partly immobilized, and she stayed on his left side without discussing it. Her foot screamed with each step. She stopped hearing the screaming after the first block. There was too much else to hear. At the second block, they found the third vehicle. It was parked across the road ahead, not moving, headlights off. A man leaning against the passenger side with a phone at his ear. Another visible behind the wheel. The road was narrow enough that going around it meant going through it, and the side streets on both flanks were visible from that position. She and Damien stopped at the corner of the block before it. He looked at the vehicle. She looked at the vehicle. "Two visible," she said. "And one I can't see behind the rear panels," he said. She took the phone out, called Reyes. "I need a location." 2 blocks from you," Reyes said. "North on Glenwood. I have 2 cars. What's the obstruction?" "Single vehicle blocking the road at Clark and—" She looked for the cross street sign. "Rasher, 3 men." "Stay where you are," Reyes said. A pause of 40 seconds. Then headlights came on at the far end of the block from the north. Blue and red, the specific strobing that meant federal units. And the vehicle blocking the road started its engine, and the man by the passenger door pushed off and got in, and the vehicle accelerated south, away from the approaching lights, directly toward the corner where she and Damien were standing. Damien pulled her back 2 steps and put himself between her and the street. The vehicle passed without slowing. She felt the displacement of air against her face and heard the engine note, and then it was passed and gone south, and the federal units were rolling to a stop in the middle of the block, and Reyes was getting out of the lead car, and Isla was walking toward her with the drives in her jacket pocket, and her foot leaving a small blood print on the sidewalk, with each step, and the cut above Damien's eye dripping steadily into his collar. Reyes was 40, sharp-faced, with the specific kind of tired that came from a long case on the edge of resolution. She looked at Isla. She looked at Damien. She looked at the blood. "Ms. Vane," she said, "are you injured?" "Functional," Isla said, which was Damien's word, and she heard herself use it and did not examine why. "The drives," Reyes said. Isla reached into her jacket, took out one of the copies, held it in her hand for a moment. 14 months, 43 names. The weight of it was less than an ounce. She handed it to Reyes. Reyes took it, looked at it. "There are 2 more copies," Isla said. "One stays with me until the originals are processed and chain of custody is formally established. One is a contingency." Reyes looked at her. "We need all 3. You need what I give you when I give it to you," Isla said. "Right now, what you have is enough to arrest Victor Orlov, 3 federal judges, and Senator Marcus Vane before 9 a.m. I suggest you use that time." Reyes studied her for a moment with the expression of a federal agent encountering a civilian who has just restructured the power dynamic of the conversation. Then she made a decision that Isla could see register in her face as a professional calculation rather than a defeat. "All right," she said, "you come with us." "Where's Orlov?" Damien asked. Both women looked at him. He was standing at the edge of the circle of streetlight with his damaged shoulder and the blood on his face and the stillness that made him look less like a man and more like a weather event that had decided to stand still for a moment. "We have a last known location," Reyes said. "We're moving on it." "Where?" Damien said. "Mr. Blackthorne, that is not information I'm going to—" "Where?" he said again. Reyes looked at him. "The harbor," she said finally. "Terminal 7. He's been there for approximately 40 minutes. Damien turned to look south toward the lake, toward a direction Ela couldn't see but could imagine. The dark water and the industrial shapes of the port terminals, and somewhere in it, a man who had 43 names on a spreadsheet and had paid for those names with money that moved through hidden accounts, and had sent men tonight to burn a house and retrieve a woman and eliminate the evidence that would end everything he'd built. "I'm going with you," Damien said to Reyes. "Absolutely not," Reyes said. "You need my dock contacts to navigate Terminal 7 without losing him to the maintenance corridors," Damien said. "He's been planning an exit through those corridors for months. I know the layout. Your units don't." Reyes looked at him with the expression of a woman running a cost-benefit analysis in real time. "Get in the car," she said. Then to Isla, "You stay with the secondary unit." "No," Isla said. Reyes stared at her. "Orlov knows my face," Isla said. "He's been hunting me for weeks. If he sees federal vehicles and burns the corridor exit, he'll take a hostage before he runs. Someone he knows is leverage. Someone he knows your people won't shoot around." She held Reyes's gaze. "I'm leverage whether I come with you or not. At least if I'm there, I'm leverage you can see and account for." A beat of silence. "That is the worst argument I've ever heard someone make for putting themselves in danger," Reyes said. "Is it wrong?" Isla said. Reyes opened the car door. "Get in," she said. "Both of you. And if either of you makes my job harder in the next 30 minutes, we understand," Isla said. She got in the car. Damien got in beside her. The car moved south toward the harbor and the drives pressed against Ela's ribs, and her foot bled slowly into the federal vehicle's carpet, and beside her Damien was holding a folded cloth from somewhere against the cut above his eye with his good arm, and the city moved past the windows going gray at the edges as the sky somewhere beyond the skyline began its first, almost imperceptible shift from black toward the dark blue that came before dawn. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. But his left hand was on the seat between them, and after a moment, not reaching, just present, just there, hers was beside it, close enough that she could feel the heat off his skin without contact. Neither of them moved. Neither of them moved away. The harbor appeared ahead through the windshield, and Terminal 7 was dark except for the lights on the upper crane rails and the secondary service lighting and one lit window on the second level of the terminal building, and Reyes was on her radio and units were moving and Orlov was somewhere inside that dark, and Ela pressed her arm against her ribs and felt the drives there, and thought about 43 names, and thought about what it cost to get here, and thought about the hand beside hers on the seat, and the distance between them that was either everything or nothing, depending on a truth she hadn't finished deciding yet. The car stopped. Reyes turned around. "Terminal 7, she said. "Orlov's last confirmed position is the northeast interior. There are 4 exits. My units cover 3. She looked at Damien. "You said you know the maintenance corridor." "I know where it comes out," Damien said. "Then that's your position," Reyes said. "You hold it. You do not engage. You call in when you have visual confirmation, and you wait for my people." "Understood," Damien said. Reyes looked at him for a half-second longer, the look of someone who doesn't fully believe the answer they've received but has run out of time to interrogate it. "Ms. Vane stays in the vehicle," Reyes said. Isla said nothing. Reyes got out. The team deployed, 6 agents moving in pairs toward the terminal's primary entrances. Reyes taking point on the north face, the precision of it visible even from the car. Damien opened his door and paused. He turned to look at her. She looked back. He had blood drying on his cheekbone and the damaged shoulder and the fault-line eyes, and she had driven in an alley and run 2 blocks with a cut foot and handed federal evidence to a woman she'd never met, and she was sitting in a federal vehicle in the harbor parking lot while the drives pressed against her heart, and there was everything unresolved between them. The original plan and the blanket and the true things said in a bathroom in the middle of the night, and the cost of all of it lying between them like something neither of them had agreed to carry, and both of them were carrying anyway. "Stay in the vehicle, then," he said. "I heard Reyes," she said. He held her gaze for 1 second. Then he got out. She waited exactly 4 seconds after his door closed. Then she got out too. The harbor smelled like rust and cold water and diesel, and something underneath that was just the lake, the specific smell of water that had been in the same place for centuries. She moved north along the terminal's exterior wall, away from the main entrances, away from where Reyes and her team were going in. Her foot was bad. She ran anyway. She'd already decided what she needed to do, and the only question was whether she could get to the maintenance corridor exit before Damien, and whether Victor Orlov would still be inside when the maintenance corridor exit was a steel door set into the terminal's northeast foundation wall, half hidden behind a row of industrial waste containers that smelled like machine oil and brine. Isla found it because she'd studied the harbor layout on her laptop 3 days ago when Damien had mentioned the port terminals in passing, and she'd quietly pulled the public infrastructure schematics because 14 months of survival had taught her that the information you gathered before you needed it was the only information you could trust. She reached the door 30 seconds before she heard footsteps inside it. She pressed herself flat against the terminal wall in the shadow between 2 containers and held her breath. Her foot was leaving blood on the concrete. She could feel the warmth of it in her shoe and the specific deep throb that meant the cut had opened fully and was not going to be managed by willpower alone for much longer. She ignored it. She was very good at ignoring things that couldn't be fixed in the next 60 seconds. The door opened outward. Victor Orlov came through it first. He was smaller than she'd imagined from the files. She'd built a picture of him from financial records and transport authorizations and the specific scale of what he'd constructed, and the picture was large, forceful, physically consistent with the size of the damage he'd caused. The man who came through the maintenance corridor door was compact, well-dressed even now, with gray at his temples and the particular stillness of someone who had survived a long time in dangerous proximity to violence by never becoming visibly afraid of it. He moved like a man exiting a building he owned, which was either habit or performance, and she couldn't tell which. 2 men came through behind him. She recognized one of them, Vincent Morelli. He looked worse than he had at the estate. The well-pressed suit was compromised, jacket missing, shirt untucked on one side, the over-prepared smoothness of him disrupted into something raw and less managed. He was talking quietly to Orlov as they cleared the door, close and urgent, and from her position 8 feet away in the shadow, she could hear the cadence without the words. And the cadence was the cadence of a man renegotiating the terms of a deal he was afraid had already expired. They turned north, away from her. She should have called Reyes. She had the phone in her hand. She should have called and given the position and stayed behind the containers and let the federal units close the net. That was the correct action. That was the action that protected the evidence and protected her and gave Orlov nowhere to go. She watched Morelli walk away beside the man who had moved 43 women through port terminals like cargo, and she thought about her father's signature on 8 transport authorizations, and she called Reyes. 1 ring. "Northeast exterior," she said quietly. "They're out. 3 of them. Orlov, Morelli, 1 other, moving north along the terminal wall." "I have you on location," Reyes said. "Do not follow. I have units 30 seconds out." "Understood," Isla said. She followed, not close, 20 feet back, staying in the shadows at the base of the terminal wall, moving with the slow, careful placing of her feet that kept the sound of her steps below the ambient noise of the harbor. The water against the pilings, the wind through the crane cables, the distant sound of the federal unit somewhere on the terminal's far side. She didn't know what she was doing exactly. She knew she was doing it. She watched Morelli talking and Orlov listening, and the second man, large, watchful, moving with professional attention to the spaces around him. And she watched the distance between them and the north end of the terminal growing shorter and understood there was a vehicle there, had to be a vehicle, a corridor exit, meant an exit plan meant a vehicle, and if they reached it before Reyes's units closed the perimeter, they were gone. And all of it, the drives, the files, the 43 names, became a federal case without its primary subject. Then Damien stepped out of the dark at the north end of the terminal wall. He was just there. Standing in the gap between the terminal building and the perimeter fence, the single exit point for someone leaving by the maintenance corridor route. His right arm was still held close to his body. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding and dried brown against his cheekbone. He looked like something the night had assembled from available materials. Dark coat, dark expression, the particular stillness that was its own form of announcement. Orlov stopped. His two men moved in front of him. Damien looked at them and then passed them at Orlov. "Victor," he said. His voice was completely level, not performance, the real thing, the level that comes from a place below emotion, from somewhere structural. Orlov looked at Damien for a moment. Then he smiled. It was a real smile, which made it worse. "Damien Blackthorne," Orlov said. "I heard your house burned." "Part of it," Damien said. "I'll finish it another time." "No," Damien said. "You won't." Orlov tilted his head slightly. "You're alone. You're injured, and you're standing between me and a vehicle." "Yes," Damien said. "So step aside," Orlov said. "This doesn't have to be personal." "It became personal," Damien said, "when you sent men into my house." "Your house sheltered something that belongs to my operation," Orlov said. "The girl, the evidence. You should have completed the original trade when Morelli told you to." Isla went very still behind her container. Morelli had told Damien to complete the trade. Morelli had been the one pushing the original deal. Not Damien, not Damien's own calculation, but Morelli managing the flow of information between the Blackthorne organization and Orlov's network, presenting the trade as strategic opportunity, positioning it as Damien's idea. She looked at Morelli standing behind Orlov's men. He hadn't seen her. He was watching Damien with the recording camera eyes, measuring something, still running the calculations even now. She thought about the original plan, delivered safely with full cooperation. She thought about what she'd felt when Damien said it in his office, with the files open on the screen between them. The specific crack along a fault line she hadn't known was under that much pressure. She thought about the trace result. Internal network. East Wing router. Morelli had accessed the directory. Morelli had been feeding Orlov the timeline. Morelli had been the architecture underneath all of it. Not just tonight, not just the drives, but the original deal, the framing of it, the slow corruption of a situation that Damien had stepped into believing it was his own strategy. She didn't know if that changed what Damien had intended. She didn't know if intentions were the thing that mattered. She knew that Orlov was standing 20 feet from her with the maintenance corridor behind him and federal units closing from the south, and Damien blocking the north exit with a damaged shoulder and no backup, and Orlov's second man was reaching under his jacket. She stepped out of the shadow. "Agent Reyes," she said loudly, to no one, to the air and the harbor and the crane cables overhead, making her voice carry. "I have a visual on Victor Orlov, northeast perimeter, outside the maintenance corridor exit. 3 subjects, requesting immediate response." She had no earpiece. She was talking to the dark harbor air, but Orlov didn't know that. His second man's hand stopped moving under his jacket. Orlov looked at her. Something in his face changed. Not fear, reassessment, the rapid recalculation of a man who has just discovered the geometry of his situation is different from what he was told. "Isla Vane," he said. "Victor Orlov," she said. She walked toward him. Not fast, not slow. She walked the way she'd walked toward Damien's SUV in the alley on the first night. Because the math was the math. Because standing still was the same as losing. Because 14 months of her life were in the drives against her ribs. And she was done letting other people decide what they were worth. "You've been running for a long time," Orlov said. "I was running," she said. "I stopped." "The drives," he said. "You have them." "The drives are already in federal custody," she said. "What I have are copies, and the originals are in a dead man switch that goes to 4 journalists simultaneously if I don't input a code in—" She checked her watch. 61 hours. Orlov looked at her. "So killing me," she said, "makes every piece of evidence in those drives public before you can stop it. Killing me is the worst thing you can do for your own survival. Silence. Somewhere to the south, she could hear vehicles. Fast, multiple, the specific engine note of federal units running without sirens, because sirens were for situations where you wanted compliance, not for situations where you wanted containment. Orlov heard them too. He looked at the vehicles, invisible but audible. He looked at Damien blocking the north exit. He looked at Isla standing between them. He looked at Morelli, and Isla watched something happen in Orlov's face. A door closing, a calculation completing, the specific expression of a man who has run the numbers and arrived at a result he spent decades believing would never come. He turned to Morelli. "You told me the drive contents were retrievable," Orlov said. Morelli's jaw moved. "You told me the girl could be managed," Orlov said, "that Blackthorn would complete the trade, that the federal contact was isolated." Each sentence came out flat and evenly spaced, the cadence of a man assembling evidence. "You told me tonight was clean. The situation changed," Morelli started. "You failed," Orlov said. "Victor." "On every point," Orlov said, "for 2 years." Morelli stopped talking. The federal vehicles came around the north end of the terminal perimeter, headlights sweeping across the dock surface, and Reyes was out of the lead car before it finished stopping, 3 agents moving with her, and Orlov's second man made a decision that was the wrong one. He drew his weapon, and 2 things happened in the same second that were both too fast for Isla to fully sequence later. Reyes's agents moved, and Damien moved. His damaged right arm notwithstanding, he crossed the distance to Orlov's second man in 4 steps, and the gun went sideways rather than forward and discharged once into the air, and the federal agents were on the man a half-second later, and he went down to the dock surface hard enough that she heard it from 15 feet away. Reyes had her weapon on Orlov. Orlov had his hands up. His face had gone very still. Not the performing stillness of a man pretending calm, but the real stillness of someone who has run out of moves and knows it and is processing what that means for the first time, perhaps in a very long time. "Victor Orlov," Reyes said, "Federal Bureau of Investigation, you're under arrest." Orlov said nothing. He looked at Isla. It was not a threatening look. It was something harder to categorize, the look of a man who has spent decades being certain that the architecture he'd built was impenetrable, looking at the specific person who had proven him wrong. There was almost something like recognition in it, the recognition of a craftsman for a specific kind of work well done, stripped of everything except the bare acknowledgement of it. Isla looked back at him and felt nothing she needed to name. Morelli tried to run. He made it 6 steps before 2 agents cut him off. He didn't fight. He stopped, went still, raised his hands with the mechanical compliance of someone who had always known this was one of the possible endings and had simply been managing the timeline. He turned as they cuffed him, and his eyes found Damien across the dock. Damien looked at him. 26 years. 2 generations. The money moved through Orlov's network before Damien was even running the organization. All those years of Morelli standing slightly behind and to the left, recording everything, feeding it in 2 directions. Damien's face was unreadable. Morelli said, "It was never personal." "I know," Damien said. And that was all. The federal agents moved Orlov and Morelli towards separate vehicles. Reyes was on her radio coordinating the arrest processing, her voice carrying across the dock in clipped bursts. The harbor was filling with federal presence now, the contained, chaotic professionalism of an operation that had been building for 2 years and was now executing its final stage. Isla stood at the edge of it and watched it happen, and felt the specific exhaustion that lives on the other side of sustained fear. Not the exhaustion of sleep deprivation or physical effort, though both of those were present, but the exhaustion of having been at extreme internal pressure for a very long time and feeling it release all at once. Her foot collapsed under her. Not fully. She caught herself on the terminal wall with one hand, one knee going down to the dock surface, the cold concrete against her kneecap a bright, clean sensation. She pressed her palm flat to the wall and breathed and told herself she was not going to sit down on a harbor dock in front of federal agents. A hand came under her arm, not grabbing. The way he never grabbed. Just present, just there, taking enough of the weight that she could get her foot back under her without it being the end of the world. She looked at Damien crouched beside her, the dried blood on his cheekbone, the shoulder held wrong, the eyes. "I've got it," she said. "I know," he said. He didn't move his hand. She let him take the weight for 4 seconds. Then she stood. He straightened beside her. They stood at the edge of the harbor with the federal operation moving around them and the lake black beyond the dock lights, and the first real gray of dawn beginning at the horizon line. The sky doing that reluctant thing it does in November over water. Not brightening, exactly, just becoming a lighter shade of dark. "Morelli structured the original deal," she said. Damien was quiet. "He brought it to you as your idea," she said. "Positioned it as strategic. Made sure you understood the East Coast territory framing before you understood what the trade actually was." "That doesn't change what I agreed to," Damien said. "No," she said. "It doesn't. I agreed to trade you," he said, "before I knew you, before I understood what you'd built, or what it cost, or who you were. I agreed to it because I thought the math worked and because Morelli had been the architecture of my decisions for long enough that I'd stopped examining the foundation." He paused. "None of that is an excuse." She looked at the water. "When did you decide not to?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "The bathroom," he said. "The first night. When you cleaned your own feet before I came in. When you sat there with a split lip and hands that weren't shaking and told me you'd rather crawl than belong to another monster." He paused. "I understood what I was looking at. I've seen that before. In a mirror." She said nothing. "The deal was dead before morning," he said. "I didn't know how to tell you because telling you meant explaining what it had been, and He stopped, started again. "I was building something I hadn't expected to be building, and I didn't want it to end before I understood what it was." She turned to look at him. "That was selfish," she said. "Yes," he said. "It cost me," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know. I'm sorry." The word sat between them. She'd heard men say it her whole life in ways that meant nothing. The reflexive sorry of men who apologized as a technique, as a pressure valve, as a way of moving past accountability without actually standing inside it. This was different. This was a man who had said "I know" before he said "I'm sorry," who understood the sequence required the acknowledgement first and the apology second, not the other way around. She looked at him for a long time. "The coat," she said, "the first morning. You said someone was already retrieving it." "Yes." "You knew it was the drives," she said. "You could have taken them that night while I was sleeping." Damien held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "I could have." She thought about the folded blanket in the closet, the air-gapped laptop still in its manufacturer packaging, the signal detector she hadn't asked for. "Why didn't you?" she asked. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Because you designed them for yourself. You built that system alone over 14 months, the drives, the dead man's switch, the entire architecture of it." He paused. "Taking them while you slept would have been the same as everything else that had been taken from you. I couldn't do it." She turned back to the water. She stood with that for a moment. The harbor was quieter now. Most of Orlov's men had been detained or had dispersed into the city, the federal net catching the majority. Two of Reyes's agents were photographing the maintenance corridor exit. Somewhere inside the terminal building, Isla could hear the distant sound of the evidence collection operation beginning. Reyes appeared beside her. "Senator Vane," Reyes said, "we're executing the warrant at his residence in 40 minutes. Isla nodded. "I want to know when it's done," she said. "I'll call you," Reyes said. She paused. "The drives?" "The originals and the second copy." Isla reached into her jacket. She took out the second copy and held it in her hand for a moment, feeling its weight, and then she gave it to Reyes. She took out her phone and navigated to the Dead Man's Switch application and entered the override code. The application confirmed. Evidence package hold maintained. Transfer suspended. "The originals I'll bring in personally," she said. "This morning. I want a formal chain of custody established with me present." 7 a.m., Reyes said. "My office." 7 a.m., Isla said. Reyes looked at her for a moment with the expression of a woman who had been running a 2-year case and had just received its completion from a source she hadn't anticipated and was still integrating that fact. "What you built," Reyes said. "The documentation, the layered encryption, the dead man's switch, the systematic extraction of evidence from inside a protected network, alone, over 14 months. She paused. "That's exceptional work." Isla looked at her. "I know," she said. Reyes almost smiled. She went back to her team. They got Damien's shoulder looked at by the federal medic unit, a young man who cleaned the Gray's wound with the brisk competence of someone who had done it often enough to have no opinion about it. And Isla's foot rewrapped properly with the right materials, and they sat in the back of a federal vehicle with the rear doors open and the dawn coming up over the harbor, and neither of them said anything for a while. The lake was going from black to dark gray to something that wasn't quite blue. November dawn over water was a slow thing, reluctant and colorless, giving nothing easily. "Your men at the estate," Isla said. "Cora got everyone out before the worst of the fire," Damien said. "I got confirmation 20 minutes ago." She let out a breath. "The estate itself," he said, "is significantly compromised." "I'm sorry," she said, and this time it wasn't the automatic sorry of the first night. It was the weighted one, the one that knew what it was acknowledging. He glanced at her. "Buildings can be rebuilt." "Is that something you actually believe or something you say?" "Ask me in 6 months," he said. She almost smiled. Almost. "What happens to the Blackthorn organization?" she asked. "That depends on what Morelli told Orlov about our operations," he said, "and on what the federal case exposes that's adjacent to our own activity." He paused. "There will be legal consequences, probably significant ones. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been preparing for it for 3 years," he said, "since I started the transition away from the operations that require the kinds of operations we've been discussing tonight." She looked at him. 3 years, she said. "It's not a fast process," he said. "Dismantling something that runs on fear and replacing it with something that runs on other things. It resists. People inside it resist. People outside it who depend on it resist." He looked at the water. Morelli resisted by subverting it from inside. "What do you replace it with?" she asked. "Legitimate security contracts," he said. "Logistics. Port consulting, which is ironic given tonight. Infrastructure protection." He paused. "Things that are useful without requiring that other things be broken." She thought about that for a moment. "You could have been doing any of that from the beginning," she said, "without the other parts." "I inherited the other parts," he said, "at 26, along with a choice between dismantling them slowly or watching someone else run them worse." "That's not the only choice that existed." "No," he said, "but it was the one I made." She let that sit. She understood the geometry of it. Not accepted, not excused, but understood. The way you understand a structure by seeing what it was built on and what it cost and what it was trying to hold up. Damien Blackthorn had inherited a burning building and chosen to walk into it and change it from inside, and had been doing that for a decade, imperfectly, compromisingly, with a consigliere who was rotting the foundation the entire time. And the result was a man sitting in a federal vehicle at dawn with a graze wound and dried blood on his face who had stood in a maintenance corridor exit rather than let Victor Orlov walk out of it. She didn't know what to do with all of that. She thought she might need more than a harbor dawn to figure it out. "The senator's warrant," she said, "when it executes." "You'll hear about it," he said. "I need to hear about it from Reyes before it's public," she said. "Not because I want warning, because I want to be the one who tells." She stopped. He waited. "There are people who worked for my father," she said. "Staff? Household. They don't know what he was. Some of them have been with him for years." She pressed her thumbnail into her index finger. "They shouldn't hear about it on the news." Damien looked at her. She was not going to let her eyes do anything she hadn't decided. "I'll make sure Reyes gives you the timing," he said quietly. She nodded. They sat in the open vehicle while the dawn came up slowly, and the harbor evidence collection continued around them, and Chicago began its reluctant awakening, the city stirring under a gray November sky that offered nothing by way of beauty, but was at least honest about it. Isla sat with her re-wrapped foot and the drives against her ribs and the weight of the morning and thought about what came next, which was a thing she'd been unable to think about for 14 months, because next had always been too far away, separated from now by everything that had to happen first. Now next was here, and it was unfamiliar terrain. At 6:45, Reyes's agents drove them separately. Isla to the federal field office for the 7 a.m. formal evidence transfer, Damien to a location she didn't ask about, and he didn't specify. She watched his vehicle pull away from the harbor and thought about the fault line eyes and the hand beside hers on the seat and all the true things said in rooms that were both of theirs for a short time and neither of theirs now. She didn't know what they were to each other. She knew they were something. She thought that something might need to be set down and looked at in the light, in a place that wasn't burning or pursued, before she could decide what to do with it. At 7 a.m., she sat across from Reyes in the federal field office and placed the original drives on the table between them. The coat with the sewn lining, the two small rectangles of hardware that held 14 months inside them, the names and the numbers and the signatures and the routing and all the careful, furious documentation of a woman who had decided that if she was going to be inside the machine, she was going to take the machine apart from inside before she left. She placed them on the table and felt their absence from against her ribs immediately. She sat with that absence and let it be what it was. Reyes processed the chain of custody with methodical care. At 8:17, she received the call confirming Senator Marcus Vane had been arrested at his Lincoln Park residence. At 8:22, the first judicial warrant executed in Springfield. At 8:59, a federal arrest team reached Vincent Morelli's attorney, who had been attempting to arrange terms since 6 a.m., and informed him that terms were not available. Isla sat in the federal field office and drank bad coffee and answered questions and watched the dominoes fall, one after another, the way she'd spent 14 months imagining they would, and found that the reality of it was quieter than she'd imagined, less triumphant, more complete, like a breath held for a very long time, released. She testified for 3 hours and was released into the gray November afternoon. She stood on the federal building steps and looked at the city that had been hunting her for 14 months, and it looked like a city. Just a city. Cold and large and indifferent in the way cities are indifferent, not malevolent, not conspiring, just enormous and ongoing and not organized around her at all. She called a car and went home. Home was a sublet in Logan Square she'd paid for in cash, given a false name to obtain, and it was small and sparse and had a window overlooking an alley, and she'd lived in it for 8 weeks before the senator's dinner, and she stood in the middle of it now and looked around at the few things she'd left there and felt the specific strangeness of returning to a space you inhabited before everything changed. She showered, she slept for 11 hours. She woke in darkness and lay in the quiet and thought about what it meant to be done. Done was strange. Done was a thing she'd been working toward for so long that she'd never fully inhabited the space it would leave behind. She thought about Reyes saying that's exceptional work with the specific recognition of someone who knew what the work actually was. She thought about 43 names in a column. She thought about what it felt like to stand in a bathroom and clean your own cuts while a man sat across from you with a bandage he wouldn't offer until you were ready for it. She lay in the dark for a long time. Then she turned on a lamp and got her phone and texted a number she'd memorized because writing it down anywhere had always felt too permanent and too vulnerable. The text said, coffee. Not a negotiation, not an alliance, just coffee. She set the phone down. She made herself wait without watching it. 3 minutes later, it buzzed. His reply had 4 words. Where? What time? Yes. She looked at those 4 words for longer than they required. Then she looked at the window above her desk, which was gray with November cloud cover and showed nothing of the city beyond it except the diffuse glow of its own light, which was a form of presence even in the dark. The city going on the way it always went on, indifferent and enormous and unchanged by anything that had happened inside it. Except that in the federal field office, there were drives in custody with 43 names on them. Except that in 3 separate detention facilities, 3 federal judges and 2 senators and 1 man named Victor Orlov were being processed into a system they had spent decades corrupting. Except that a woman who had spent 14 months invisible was going to walk into a coffee shop tomorrow and be visible, be present, be entirely herself, without the drives against her ribs or the constant forward-facing tension of someone who has been running so long they've forgotten what stillness feels like. She put the phone down. She turned off the lamp. She lay in the dark, and for the first time in 14 months, she did not run inventory of threats before sleep. She did not check the door locks again. She did not lie with her hand pressed flat to the drives in the coat lining beside her bed. She just lay in the quiet of a city that was not hunting her anymore and breathed in and out and let the breathing be uncomplicated. Outside, snow had started. The first real snow of the season, the kind that falls late in November without commitment, more statement than accumulation, covering the city in a thin white layer that would likely be gone by morning. It fell past the window in slow diagonals, lit from below by the amber of the streetlights, and she watched it from the bed without getting up because watching it was enough. 3 months later, she moved into the loft on the river. It was the top floor of a restored industrial building in Fulton Market, with north-facing windows that turned the river into something almost beautiful in winter light, an exposed brick, and radiators that worked erratically, but worked. She chose it because it was hers, not cash in a false name, hers, her name on the lease, her credit, her choice. The choosing of it felt like something she needed to keep feeling. She worked with the Federal Cybercrime Unit on a contract basis, building evidence architecture on 4 subsequent cases over the following months. Reyes became someone she had lunch with occasionally, not a friend exactly, but someone who understood the specific grammar of the work, which was its own kind of companionship. She testified at her father's trial in February. She sat in the witness box for 6 hours and answered every question with the precision and completeness she had always brought to the documentation. Not cruelly, not with the satisfaction she'd sometimes imagined she'd feel, just cleanly, the way work gets done when you've had a long time to understand why it matters. Her father looked old. He looked like a man who had been certain for a very long time that the walls of his life were solid, and who had discovered in the space of a single morning that they were not, and had not recovered from the discovery. He looked, she thought, like a man who had taken everything he'd been given and used it to build the wrong thing, and who was only now, too late, beginning to understand the cost of that. She did not hate him. She did not forgive him either. She did not know, and might never know, where the space between those two things was supposed to leave her. She thought that not knowing might be the honest answer. She thought that living with the honest answer was better than the alternative, which was performing a certainty she didn't have about something she was still carrying. She testified and went home and cooked herself dinner and watched the river change color as the light changed and did not sleep badly that night. Damien came on Fridays. That was the arrangement, arrived at without much discussion, the way the real arrangements between people tend to arrive, not negotiated so much as accumulated, built from small repeated decisions that establish a pattern before either person has fully acknowledged they're building one. He came on Friday evenings, and they cooked, badly in his case and adequately in hers, and sat at the table overlooking the river and talked about the things people talk about when they're no longer in immediate danger, the shape of the days, the cases she was working, the slow structural dismantlement of Blackthorn operations that he was navigating with 2 federal oversight agreements, and a patience that looked, from close proximity, like something he'd had to learn rather than something he'd always possessed. He was being charged with 3 counts of conspiracy related to pre-transition operations. He was cooperating with federal prosecutors on 6 parallel cases. His attorneys said the cooperation would likely reduce the charges substantially. His attorneys also said substantially was not a word that eliminated the possibility of consequences, which was a thing Damien seemed to understand with the same specific quality he brought to everything he understood. Completely, without flinching, without the performance of being unbothered that would have been its own kind of dishonesty. "Are you afraid?" she asked him once, on a Friday in March when the river was going gray under a late winter rain and they were eating food that had burned slightly at the edges because neither of them had been paying sufficient attention to the stove. He considered the question the way he considered everything, fully, without rushing. "Of consequences," he said. "No. I've known the consequences were coming for a long time, and I made the decisions anyway, which means I accepted them, which means fear isn't the right word for what I feel about them now." "What is the right word?" she asked. He looked at her. "Accountable," he said. She looked back at him across the table with the burned food and the river and the rain and all the distance they'd traveled from an alley in November with blood on her feet and his hands and a question neither of them had finished answering yet. She reached across the table and turned his right hand over, the scar across the back of it, pale and thin and old. She ran her thumb along it once, the full length of it, and felt him go very still. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. Outside, the rain came down steadily on the river, and the city moved through it the way cities move through rain, without adjusting, without complaint, just continuing, enormous and ongoing and indifferent to the small light burning in a loft window, where two people who had survived the same winter were sitting at a table learning what it meant to be in the same room without the driving necessity of danger to explain why they were there. The ring came on a Friday in April. There was no theater, no staging. He was in her kitchen burning pasta when she came home from a meeting with Reyes, and he was frowning at a cookbook page with the expression of a man engaged in a genuinely adversarial relationship with the written instructions. And she laughed at the doorway until she had to lean against it. And when she looked up, he was watching her with the fault-line eyes and something in them that was open in a way she hadn't seen before, fully open, no door, no suspension, just present. He put the velvet box on the counter without speaking. She looked at it. She looked at him. "No speech?" she said. He shook his head. "No conditions?" Another shake. "What if I say no?" He looked at her with those eyes. "Then I'm still here next Friday," he said, "and the one after that. And I keep ruining your pasta until you run out of patience and throw me out yourself." She laughed. It came up through her unexpectedly, through all the layers, through the 14 months and the alley and the files and the testimony and everything that had made her the specific shape she was. And it came out real and unmanaged, and she felt it in her chest on the way out, like something releasing that had been held for a long time. She picked up the box, opened it. A simple ring. Single stone, unpretentious setting, nothing that announced itself. Nothing that looked like ownership or display or the kind of jewelry that women in powerful men's lives wore to communicate their men's power. Just a ring. Elegant in the way of things that don't need to prove anything. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about a bathroom and a first aid kit and a blanket folded in a closet. She thought about 43 names and 8 signatures and the weight of drives against her ribs. She thought about a doorway and the word accountable and a hand turned over on a table and a scar she'd run her thumb along once without explaining why. She thought about what it meant to choose a thing freely, not because you needed it, not because the math required it, not because the alternative was worse, because you wanted it, because wanting was, itself, the thing you'd been fighting to recover the right to do. She took the ring out of the box. She put it on herself. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she would spend years trying to describe accurately and never quite succeed, because it was too many things at once: relief and steadiness, and something that wasn't pride exactly, but was adjacent to it, the specific look of a man who has spent a long time being what he had to be and is learning, slowly, what it means to be what he chose. He reached out and touched her face. She leaned into his hand instead of away from it. Outside the window, the river moved past in the April dark, carrying the last of the winter with it toward the lake. And the city was enormous and ongoing and indifferent to the small, particular life being lived in that lit window. And neither of them was running anymore, and the pasta burned, and neither of them cared.